We all expected there to be somewhat of a larger turnout. This was really stunning, and it surpassed recent memory in terms of a midterm election. Usually they're between 55 and 65%. It looks like when we get the finals number in, it'll be well past that. So, and it was, it was great. It was wonderful to see so many voters coming out. Caused a few problems at the end of the day, but by and large, it was a tremendous day for Connecticut.
Because there's that big surge and kind of push at the end for people to register to vote. I mean, do you know particularly how many people actually did that last-minute Election Day registration?
Oh, we won't know yet, but there was a big surge in Election Day registration. But don't forget, there was a big surge in registration, period. I kept announcing for months now that we're seeing extraordinary new voter registration. We had over 300,000 new voters since 2016, particularly younger voters, 18 to 24-year-olds. There were 90,000 new 18 to 24-year-olds before you even got to Election Day registration. So it was pretty stunning.
We know that Stefanowski has conceded the race to Ned Lamont. He's now the governor-elect in Connecticut. Do you have any information in terms of numbers and any locations, cities, or towns that have yet to report numbers? I know there was 3 this morning. New Haven was still tallying. Where is all of that at?
New Haven is still tallying, and that was because they were one of the cities that had the wet ballots. People were kind of dripping on their ballots. It's a really weird problem to have because, usually in a rainstorm, people don't show up as much. The rain did not stop people. And so the ballots got wet. They wouldn't go through the machines. So many of them had to be hand counted. And that is quite a process. So they were still counting this morning all night.
And kind of on the topic of the machines, some of these machines are older machines, I believe. No, not older? Or
well, they're all the same age. They were all bought with federal funds in 2003 after the hanging chads of the election of 2000. So I don't think that was really the problem. We actually had this happen once before in 2006 where there was a rainstorm and the cards won't read the wet ballots, but we let them dry out. If you let them dry out, you can then feed them through the machine. So it really wasn't the age of the machine that was the problem.
So this is not an indication, or is it an indication that there is that this is a time for an upgrade to the system?
I don't think that had anything to do with it, honestly. It was really, you just had to wait a little longer. See, none of us are used to waiting anymore. We all want instant results. We have to remember it's always been about 24 hours before we got results in. And the fact that they had to hand count some of the ballots just delayed things a little bit. So I'm not as concerned about the memory cards, which were the ones that were, not able to read it, because you can always bring in another one. It was more extensive than usual.
And in your mind, what could be done to kind of streamline the voting process a little bit for us?
Well, I mean, we are one of the few states that doesn't have any version of county or regional level voting. And so that's part of the problem. You have 169 towns all reporting in, at various times. We do now have an election management system where they upload the results instantly from their towns. But also, with all the concerns about security and cybersecurity in particular, we take no chance with uploading things electronically, because that could be tampered with. So even that takes more time, but we think it's worth it to be able to type everything in rather than sending it through the internet. I just don't feel it's secure.
And also early voting.
Yeah, I mean, there are solutions that I have proposed many times and will propose again, such as early voting. I mean, many states, I think up to 40 now, states have some version of early voting. My last proposal was the weekend. So that would take the pressure off of Election Day. And also, other states also allow for anyone to get an absentee ballot. And more in Connecticut, frankly, people are doing it anyway. But in our state, under the Constitution, the state Constitution, you need an excuse to get an absentee ballot. So those are some of the things I think we need to look at again, and it really would take the pressure off Election Day.
I want to go back to the wet ballots real quick, because some people were worried, well, did my vote not count? How did you guys handle it? Did you let them dry, or then they just put them in a pile to count them by hand and add them to the number from that precinct? How did that work? How was it handled?
I think different towns did different things. We didn't get the reports of all of them. We started hearing from some of the towns, oh, you know, our machines are not able to count these ballots. I think many of them did dry off, and they actually eventually put them through the machines again, and it was fine.
And in terms of the same day registering voters, there was a lot of people in New Haven last night. I think you saw a video of them chanting, "Let us vote." What is the law, and how is that being handled? Are those votes going to be counted? So are they, and what's the law?
The law for Election Day registration is you must be registered to vote by 8 o'clock. Normally, as you know, if you're in line at 8 o'clock, if you're already registered, you're allowed to vote. So the big concern was getting people actually registered, not actually voting. So in an effort to get through this very long line, and in fairness to the local registrars, it was enormous turnout for Election Day registration. And as I understand it, many of those people were first-time voters in Connecticut and had never registered in Connecticut before. So there's a separate rule about that. It's slightly easier. They don't have to do quite so much checking if these are people who have never registered in Connecticut. So I think things, you know, were slow, but we were getting most people apparently registered until, you know, the very end, when there were still, you know, maybe 100 people, I believe, who didn't get registered for the 8 o'clock. They were afraid they weren't going to make it. So they basically rushed the system a little bit. And while they all did register and fill out registration cards, they didn't have time to get them into the system. And so they just took the cards and registered them all at once. And that way they had their right to vote by 8 o'clock. And that's what happened. It was challenged. There was a sort of a quick court hearing last night. There will be apparently another one on Friday. And the resolution was, we took those 100 ballots apparently and agreed that they would be set aside until there was a resolution. So, and I believe now that Mr. Stefanowski has conceded that probably it's no longer an issue because it's kind of a moot point.
It's not going to make or break it.
It's not going to make or break it. And so they were treated sort of like provisional ballots, which I believe they sort of were. I mean, the effort was a good one, a little unorthodox, but, you know, the effort was to get these young people to be able to vote. And they're right, you know, I mean, they felt it was their right to vote. They were in line and they wanted to vote. And for my money, I would say we have to do everything we can to allow them to vote.
But I would imagine for 2 years from now, the recommendation would be don't wait until 10 minutes before the polls close on Election Day. Get out there earlier so this doesn't happen again.
Absolutely. We say it over and over again, but it still happens. And we need sufficient staffing to take care of it. But that's always a close question because it's very expensive to staff up like that. So I see it from all sides. I'm glad we got a resolution.
Has this ever happened before?
Yes, it has. Actually, in New Haven, 2 years ago and I think 4 years ago, we're still having those problems. By the way, it was not just New Haven, also Yukon. The Yukon students had a problem up in Mansfield, same kind of thing, and probably for the same reason.
And so looking back at yesterday, and again, given that turnout, the last minute voter registration, what would you do to improve the process going forward? Or what would you suggest going forward?
Well, number one, early voting, some form of early voting. I'm going to go back to the legislature and suggest it again. My favorite idea is probably the weekend and the Tuesday. At least that would take some pressure off. And some version of no-fault absentee balloting. We'd have to change some of our procedures, but I think that would be well worth it. You know, I'd like to see a more regional process, honestly. I think that would help. And, you know, but other than that, you know, you have to keep in mind, it was a very smooth election day, by and large, when you consider the enormous turnout, the massive rainstorms we were having. I mean, it really, except for this issue with Election Day registration, it was a remarkably smooth day.
And as far as staffing goes too, is that up to the individual city and town for staffing at polling places? We got a number of concerns that not only with New Haven, but also Terryville High School, that there were just so many people there and not enough people to handle the amount of people.
Exactly. And yes, it is a local, the local towns pay for the elections. So that makes this something that they have to decide at the local level and budget for. So that's the balance they have to draw, is they don't know exactly how many people to expect. We give them advice about these things. They have to report to us now exactly how many ballots they're ordering, for example. You didn't see a problem with that yesterday because we've had problems in the past when we ran out of ballots, or at least now people know there's a way to solve that. So we do better every year, I think, with planning for these kinds of, I would call this almost like an emergency. You know, they just have to plan ahead. We try to help them, but you can't always be perfect. And, you know, in these days of tight budgeting, you know, towns are cutting back on things, and it's really difficult. You know, this is a once-a-year occurrence. It's very difficult. They've got to include sufficient funds in their budgets to do these things.
Denise, did you send people to New Haven last night?
No, I don't really have the staff to do that. I did deploy some of our volunteer attorneys to go down and try to help. We do have a program called the Legal Assistance Program, and I believe we did deploy several of them and ask them to go see if there's anything they could do to help with the situation.
I mean, clearly this should not have been a surprise. This is not the first time college students have tried to register. Why are we having the same issue three elections in a row now in the same two locations?
Not ideal.
Are there any close elections now that you foresee any recounts at this point?
It would appear that there are several potential recounts in the Senate, state Senate, that looked like there were 3 races that might be close enough that there will be a recount required. And I'm not sure in the House. I believe there are several in the House as well. But that's all we're seeing for now, yeah. But it was obviously a kind of a blue wave here in Connecticut, I would say. Both the House and Senate picked up Democratic seats. So, you know, and all of us on the constitutional level, we all won our respective races on the Democratic side. And by the way, I'm happy that I won. It was sort of the last thing I was thinking about last night, frankly, but that's where we are.
Anything
Okay.
else you wanna say?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.